Recording. Okay, well, hello, everyone, and Keely.
Hi, Angie. Hi, everyone.
I'll just begin by introducing myself. My name is Angie Pittman. I'm a dancer and also choreographer and a full-time professor here at Tisch. I'm an assistant arts professor in the dance department at NYU. And I have the pleasure of speaking and collaborating with Keely Garfield today, and I'll hand it over to her to introduce herself.
And I am Keely Garfield, and I currently am still participating in the great body of the world as a dancer and a choreographer. And alongside that, I am currently a hospital chaplain working in end life and trauma. And people are usually very curious about that. Connect about that relationship, and I'm sure it'll come up later.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here to let the audience in on why these two people are in the room. Keely has this incredible show happening at Skirball called The Invisible Project, and I have the pleasure of also being a dancer in that show. So it's exciting for me to have this conversation with her in this capacity. And I thought because the dancers are a huge part of the work, I wanted to sort of start with our relationship and how we met in the context, how we met in the dance world. So yeah, I was curious, Keely, how do you think we met? How did we meet? I'm always like, what are those?
We're talking in this play and in this place and time, then I can maybe recall the details of that. Other than that, I have a sense it maybe was, back when the ocean was formed. Let's see. I was very, very happily invited by my good friend Reggie Wilson to create a piece for the Dance Space Project platform back when. I don't know if I think it was 2016. I think it was 2016. And that was in response to the kind of convening of that platform was around Black churches, dance and downtown dance, and the kind of what I was going to say converging of those things. And I was attending a performance that Angie was also part of that platform. Go maybe talk about what you were doing. And I saw Angie dancing, and my mind was blown. She entered from the door of the sanctuary and kind of like made her way like a river of energy and momentum and pausing and nuance and just beautiful through the space, and I fell in love.
Yes, yeah, I remember meeting you around, and I felt like it's funny that word organic is like so overused, but I felt like our meeting was such like an organic like intersection of our two like artistic selves meeting, and I felt like it was really as a result of Reggie Wilson's work with curating this platform. And to say more about that platform, it was really thinking about how a lot of like spiritual and religious institutions in the city has like held a lot of space for experimental dance and exploration dance and exploratory dance, I would say, and postmodernism. So it was really questioning, like, what does it mean to be making dance and also being in conversation with a lot of times an actual like spiritual institution. And in that case, it was St. Mark's Church. And it's funny because teaching at NYU, in the dance department is on Second Avenue as well. So I always talk about my students in relationship to this religious institution that's right down the street, that holds so much space for like experimental work and art, but also is in conversation with like a spiritual history of the city. So yeah, that I feel like that type of work, Reggie curated both of us because he knew that all of our work was sort of always had these like undertones of spirituality and these sort of like bigger bigger value systems that go in and through the body, particularly with me growing up in church and doing a lot of liturgical dancing and then all of your spiritual practices. So yeah, I thought it was just an incredible meeting of your work. And it was like such a testament to like Reggie Wilson's like curation.
Yeah,
So
that was certainly, I think, a highlight of my work in dance. I think for me, it was a really wonderful opportunity I think the piece I made was called Mandala, and it was really sort of prompted by the Zen Peacemaker Order sort of inquiry into what are the forms that we need to create in society to be able to see our interconnectivity or oneness. And I feel like since that time, there's been an acceleration in terms of urgency around that question, and an imperative to answer it.
Mhm.
Sure.
It's love and I like thinking back to that time because because I stepped into mandala like at the the last moment as an introduction to the work and to thinking to now 2023 and how I feel like as choreographers we like kind of make the same dance over and over again, or I'm like, at least me, I'm trying to like get at that, like what is that. So I'm curious, did how is like your work, your chaplaincy work and your spiritual practice bringing you to the Invisible Project now? Like, are there any like trails that have led you from mandala to the Invisible Project?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with the idea that one is making the same dance over and over again. And on some level, I look back at now at a long career, um, or a long life in dance, and I see that maybe in this particular piece I was coming in through the window, and maybe this piece I was like burrowing up from under the earth, and this piece I was like zooming in from out there. I feel with the Invisible Project, I'm really putting it on, like really just donning the mantle. Um, but my mind is going in a couple of directions here, that back to where I started with what is the people ask me, how does choreography and chaplaincy go together? Why is a dancer a chaplain? And for me, it's not surprising. It's really a continuum of research or exploration or embodiment. I think as a dancer on one end of the spectrum, it's characterized by movement and sound mostly. And then as a chaplain attending end of life, it's characterized by stillness and silence. And so that spectrum and my movement through that landscape, or navigating those poles of experience, are uh, deeply entwined. A deep curiosity and wonder and fear, really, of the body. What is this thing? And then alongside that, as you said, Angie, this meeting is not accidental, in the sense that I think the thing that I value most about my life in dance has been the relationships I've had, particularly in the room with the people I'm collaborating with the other dancers. I tend to say choreography by, because for me, it's inherently a collaborative form. The word choreography, I mean, it doesn't happen without deep collaboration with others, with self and others. And to highlight here that our colleagues in this work, Paul Hamilton, I have had the pleasure of working with Paul for about 20 years now, which, in dance years, like dog years, that's like 100 years, I think. Um, Molly Lieber, going on, a decade, just over probably. Um, Angie, as we've said, this was like pre times and now post times. And Opal Ingle, who has joined us, had been working with for a short time, 6 months. But again, there's something outside of time and space that happens when you come into the studio with each other and meet on a soul to soul level. And that doesn't mean that, there aren't arguments or, rustling up against or, like bumping into. It's not all, I would say it is all peace and light, but peace and light are hard won. And they take a lot of, it's a lot of work, as evidenced by the fact that we don't have that outside of the room in the world at large.
Mhm.
I don't know where I went then. And where'd I go?
I'm with you wherever you went. I'm here. Yeah, I mean, it's so beautiful. I think, and to think about this recording as like a glimpse into inside of the process, because I think maybe a common understanding of dance and choreography is that the dancers are material, the dancers are are replaceable, the dancers are, like I think this could be a common thought, but I think that's not the dance world that I engage in. And I know exactly from how you beautifully just said it, it's like not how you work. And you really encourage the dancers. There's an understanding that the dancers are whole humans and whole beings. And I sort of talk to my students in that way of like, it's about the skills that you're building and then the skills that you're in the classroom with, but you're bringing your whole self and all of your experiences, and that's what actually makes the work. So it was really lovely to hear you articulate it in that way.
Your students are incredibly, they may not know for a very long time how lucky they are to have you offer that teaching for them. And I happily had the opportunity to be at Tisch with and teach um, the
The
other day.
undergraduate seminar,
Yeah,
with our BFA 1s and 2s.
yeah. And one of the things that I was really keen to highlight is that, which again dovetails into the work of the Invisible Project, is that a lot of what you are bringing to the practice of making a dance making, choreography, and I'm including everything in that, whether it's improvised, it's a score, is invisible. You're bringing your presence, number one. You're bringing your ability to listen, whole body, full bodied listening. You're bringing your ability to translate different languages. You're bringing compassion. Without that, there's nothing happening. There's nothing. You're bringing so much, and it's the kind of fascia, it's the glue, it's the gunk, the stuff that kind of supports the muscle, the bone, the tissue, the sweat, the leap, the turn, the dive. None of that exists without the kind of propulsion of the emotional, spiritual being. And I want to, before I forget, say specifically then in our particular community that we've assembled in this dance. For me, Angie, you bring great joy. You bring joy.
Wow, that's really
Again, and that ain't easy. It's very difficult to bring the joy in the midst of turmoil. But bringing the joy, but also I think you have a really incredible ability. That word translator kicked it off for me, because you both in the body, but also, when we're talking or when we're trying to figure out how something, what is connecting, what is moving, what's stuck. I think you function a lot of the time in this process we're in as the person that is able to kind of translate and communicate, kind of across boundaries and across and through different through the different relationships that are in the room, if that makes sense. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. I'm like wipes away tear. I mean, it's like we're doing this at like on the cusp of show week. So, there's all of our it's such a culmination,
Well, we have a show.
we got a show. But it also feels like such a celebration of our work inside the room and like, we've gotten here. And so that I wasn't expecting that reflection, but that really fills me a little bit, powers me into the week.
Yeah, I think, again, as somebody, and I feel like I can kind of, stake my claim to this as somebody who has been at the bedside of the dying at end life, attending end life countless times. And how many times, and it's not like in the movies, people don't just wake up and say, oh, I wish I'd learned to sing. But, what people remember, and, I mean, it's not, I'm hardly the first person to report it, is who they loved and who loved them and who was with them. And so ultimately, I can't remember the sequence from Mandela. I can't remember, that cool partnering thing we did in whatever dance back when. I'll be lucky if I remember what we're doing next week, we can come to that UTL's dance. But what I remember now, and it's close on now 40 years of making dances, is the relationships, especially in the studio.
It's so beautiful. Yeah, I think your longevity and your work is so incredibly fascinating. And one thing that you just were talking about, like being at the bedside and your chaplaincy work, and I mean, the word grief comes up a lot in the room, on the other side of joy, and I was just thinking about this the other day about if this is a glimpse into the the intuitiveness of your making. I'm just like, your intuition is so strong in the room, and you are, it's like the dancers are there to be collaborators and to be present beings, but the choreographic choice making is really coming from your intuition. And it's such a joy to also be an interpreter and a translator of that intuition in the room. But I'm curious because I would love for you to talk potentially more about like your choreographic choice making around material, and potentially how that's informed by how you experienced grief in the hospital or in your chaplaincy work. And yeah, how are those sort of intertwined?
Yeah, and some of it I can say, and some of it is a mystery, and that is like also like I want to also bow to that and respect that, because there's a lot of mystery. The I do think it's right to say that the dance is kind of in a way born out of intuition, and on some level, I don't even know if that's not something I necessarily claim. It's more like it's a little bit matrix, right? It's a little bit like tapping into like what is here, what is moving through the world, global, communal, personal, what is moving through, and how's that where is that in the body? Oh wow, it's like stuff, it's here, or when we started, and I actually want to come back in a minute and ask you to talk about the experience you had when we started doing this on Zoom at the beginning of it, because this piece initially was, I think, commissioned in 2020. So we, did a big Zoom moment. Then the world, like, kind of burst into flames, and we all paused, and then we resumed in person, and here we are. So I want to going over there, and but before, um, I think that specifically this project, the Invisible Project, in a way, I've come to realize that what the Invisible Project is the work that we've been invited to do on the inside, right? That's invisible. Um, your mission, should you choose to accept it, right? Um, but also realizing that this set of competencies or skills that you study to become a chaplain, including things like active listening, compassionate presence, bearing witness to suffering, affirming strengths, making meaning, facilitating expression of emotions. I mean, am I talking about chaplaincy, or am I talking about dancing? And
Mhm.
when I realized that, I was like, wow, that's really interesting. So for us, it's been like, okay, so what does it look like if we kind of, where in the body is listening, or where in the body is real presence? Where in this particular moment in this dance is um, suffering?
Mm.
Where are our strengths? Um, where are we leaning in? Where are we leaning away? So they all become very, not it's not in the head, it's in the body. All of these things. Presence is not in the head, it's in the body. Well, let me ask you then,
Mm.
what do you what do you think about that, and what is your experience of those things? Because again, I'm bringing a particular language around that, coming from my work as a chaplain, and from my practice as a Zen Buddhist. But those words, presence, bearing witness, suffering, compassion, blah 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 blah, it's, it's all, what happens in your body, what is going on in your body in the room?
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great question. Because like the room, I mean, we hold all so many different trainings and we hold so many different um yeah, amalgamations of mentors and teachers. And so when you started to speak of these words in that sense, it's like coming from your chaplaincy training, I was like, oh, okay. Like I hadn't really thought about like the list in that sort of explicit way. And in many ways, I'm like, yeah, I do that. Yeah, that's like that intersects with my work on this earth. Like it definitely makes sense. And I think the one that stuck out to me the most was the bearing witness, I would say. Um, because a lot of that my time in the room as a dancer feels like I am trying to understand. It's like how do we meet? So a lot of that trying to understand so that I can interpret and so that I can like embody has to do with just like witnessing and seeing. um and I have like such an extensive background in in the word witness because I grew up in the church. I sort of grew up in like a non-denominational uh sect of Christianity where like being a witness is really important to your personhood. And and it's funny because once I mean this is kind of a whole other conversation, but once I mean I started dance training there, but once I started going dance training in academia and in the university, um I came around to authentic movement as a practice. And I sort of just like took to it, like authentic. I mean, but those of us that are watching this that might not know, authentic movement as a practice is a sort of improvisational dance form that has to do with improvising whatever impulse it is in the body. And I'm paraphrasing, but it doesn't have to be attached to any sort of codified form. It's really like a moving expression of yourself. And there's what most important part of authentic movement is the observer, and the language is often used. The witness is the language, and oftentimes the person who's observing is seeing and taking in, and then sometimes in the practice, after you're done moving, the observer listens to you speak, and then the observer responds. So anyway, I'm sort of thinking back to my early dance training, and like coming into university and being like, wait, this isn't new. Like I get how this could be new for some in this program, but like connecting that experience and that dance training of witnessing was always in my body as a little kid in church, like looking up and like seeing and being a part of and assisting and helping and serving. So yeah, witnessing feels like such an important part of my journey as a person, and in my dance life, definitely it's just like really intuitive for me. So yeah, I feel it. I definitely feel it in my body, in the room.
I think I love that. I think it's so powerful when we can make out, and that's like, again, the invitation is for each person um to show up and then see if this resonates, and what does that change the word or whatever, or like connect with it in a way that I think feels resonant and feels self-actualizing. And it's not about, some figure in the room standing saying, okay, everybody, let's all practice active listening. It's like, uh, but then doing that deep dive into where in our lives we have felt listened to, where in our lives we have really listened to somebody else. And we know in the world, it's like juggle the plates, spin the plates, juggle the balls. Like, don't drop anything, keep going, keep busy, don't look.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking, I heard the poet Ben Okri, um, British Nigerian poet, talking in an interview recently about his new collection of poems, and he said that I think it's I'm waiting. It's a treat for me to go out and buy the book after the show, you know. But I heard that like on like page whatever one or of the book, right at the bottom it says read slowly.
Mm.
Oh,
Hmm.
I would love to be able to tell, because the witnessing is connecting me to the fact that now we are engaged in a live performance art, right? And that the performance part and the asking people to come and bear witness or to listen or to attend is key. Um, I mean, it's a different animal when we're with each other, and then when we ask people to come into the circle and be part of that. So the witnessing goes on and goes on. And but I would love to be able to say to everybody, who comes, read slowly. I mean, this piece, just go slow with it.
Hmm.
And that would be the counter to, all of the noise and busyness.
That's, yeah. I mean, I just I had so many thoughts hearing you say that. And it's making me wonder. mm, it's making me wonder about a lot of things, and it's because I think it's somewhat in response to a particular history of the stage, and like sort of being a form that is potentially connected to entertainment. And I think in particularly in my work as, as an educator and a choreographer, a lot of times it has to do with like being a Black body on stage, and like what is that expectation, like always sort of being in a conversation with a particular history of minstrelsy and entertainment, and also like that entertainment being connected to forced labor in this country, and how in many times my work is like a refusal to entertain, or refusal to like do too much on stage. So it just makes me think about, oftentimes linking back to your thought about stillness and silence in your chaplaincy work in this continuum, how that sometimes feels like the correct answer, for lack of a better word, to this expectation of like, what does your body as a perceived like Black woman on stage, what is it doing? So it makes me think about all of those particular history. And of course, that is coming through my storied body in this cultural moment. And then it also makes me think about the particular sections in this work that feels like it's like a refusal and or not even a refusal, but an invitation for the audience to potentially lean in closer, to be patient with themselves, to be patient with us, to see what's moving in the room that maybe is outside of our own bodies. So I'm curious if you wanted to talk about any particular sections of the dance that feels, I mean, I feel like Util's dance is one of them, and the section called Rest feels like one of them, but I'm curious if you had, yeah.
I would love it if I maybe take on a little bit about Util's dance, and maybe you take on a little bit about Rest,
Mhm.
because and I think it's really, and we know from being in the room that we are not, I in my chaplaincy training, there was this idea that like you have to leave things outside of the room, right? The doctor, the clinician, whatever, when they go to see the patient, they leave everything outside the room. I don't believe in that or agree with it. I think it's the opposite. I think you bring everything in to the room. That does not mean that, like, I'm going to start from like, yeah, my dad wasn't so into me being a dancer, and I had this like little portable record player, and I made everybody on the street dance. And I'm not gonna, it's not, but it's in there. It's in there, like that suffering, right? So I'm bringing everything into the room. And when we're in the studio with Paul and yourself and Molly and Opal and myself, we are bringing all of that into the room. And we've um, sounds like it was a burden, which it wasn't. Navigate that and negotiate that and be upfront about it and say, okay, this works, this doesn't work, this, what is this, what are we together? Rest for me is so important, and I'd love to hear your take on it, although I know some of it, of course, as we made it together. But one of the things that's very powerful for me in that section is that you do see all of the way our bodies and embodiment um, uh, show up together. So I'll pause there and go back to you, Teal. Or I don't know, we're on Rest.
We're
You
on
want
Rest.
to go? You go for Rest, and then we'll circle back.
Well, first of all, I thought it was like genius that I mean, that you brought this to the dance students as a something to embody. And Rest is a section of the piece that is based in an improvisational score that Keely instructed or facilitated, but also had a lot of input from the dancers as well. And yeah, the students are so used to doing they're in a very intense training program. And I went into the classroom. I teach the morning technique class, and then they were like, I was talking about the show and inviting them, and they're like, Keely came in yesterday, and they're like, we did Rest. And they were like so happy, and like I could just tell in their bodies they were
Don't you
just
love that the verb has become we did rest? Because you have to do rest. You can't just rest.
they're like, we did Rest. I was like, I actually love this sentence, because I'm like, y'all do need to rest. But also like the fact that they had this experience with, yeah, I think it was like genius to have them to teach them that section. But Rest is like the only part of the piece that is, and maybe this isn't true. Is it the only part of piece that's improvisational, would you say?
Yeah, I would say so. And I would say that even though it is improvisational, it is a very, very it's not the score is very specific.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
there's a container, it
Yeah,
really, it's not it can't really move outside of its resting state.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah,
And the score is there to like help support sort of some of these like greater conversations that we had. And what I think is so beautiful about the section called Rest is that it is in conversation. I think simply it's like choosing between resting and choosing between supporting someone's rest. That's an oversimplification, but we're dealing with words here. And um I I think it's so beautiful because we are 5 dancers in the room and we all have our own relationship to rest. And I think there's been so many sort of, as a mover in the space, uh, meta conversations for me about Black people deserving rest and sort of Black people being in this country, years and years of building this country. And then now, like, there needs to be some sort of reparations for rest. And that's an idea that I just think about in my life all the time, that intersects with many different things. But when we started to build this score in the room, I was like, oh, this is coming to mind. And then that comes into the room. And then it's like, okay, we have all of us here that are all different and like represent a diverse variety of like perspectives in the world and being socialized in the world. And what does it mean for this to be in the room, and then also everyone else's everyone else's bodies in the room, so we can have these conversations, and at the end of the day then we can enact this score, and it's an opportunity to be like, okay, what does the body want now? Because part of that freedom is acknowledging my ancestors' labor, and then my body now choosing to either go really hard or rest, or everything in between. So the liberation comes in the choice making versus the the mandate. So when I think about the section rest, it's really feels like an embodied response for all of us to think about our own relationships to rest, and an invitation to potentially facilitate someone else's rest in the moment, and also witness and also be. And it takes it away from like a heady conversation into like the now and present. And it was like such a beautiful way to just like, okay, there's this, and then there's like this, and they're all in conversations with each other. And right now, this is happening.
I think it's just so powerful, who gets to rest, who doesn't get to rest. And from my perspective as somebody who became part of that the essential worker workforce at the height and during the pandemic, um, I certainly can attest to who are the people that do not get to rest in our society. It's very clear. They were all on the train with me going to work. And, you know, um, it's heartbreaking, actually. And it's a risky, it's so funny because it also led into this conversations that we had in the room about, um, you know, radical self-care, um, Audre Lorde's work around that, but how that has come down to be like a $200 moisturizer, right? And that's some radical self-care. Not so much, but that's what we've been sold as an alternative to really fucking resting. And to put that on this, and then it also led us into conversations about the privileging of, you mentioned all the different techniques and dancing and the histories that are in the room through everybody's body, and accumulation of study and everything else, and somatic study, and the privileging of what is hard versus what is not hard. And there are parts in that. There's a piece called Airplane, which is and your dance, Cyber Angel. There are parts of the piece that require a lot of so-called vigorous and like strength and endurance and and the stuff, and you get the leg and the thing and the turn and the jump. And so we can see there's the dancing. And then we come to rest, which is not the dancing, but we don't feel that way about it in the piece. It is, and it's actually more challenging as a performer to do that part. What we found, I think, right, was that in order to do rest, we actually have to rest. And that is a bizarre thing to be doing in the middle of your dance when people pay their money and they're sitting in the seats there. But it's important. We're not making the same dance we made before COVID. We have to talk about these things. We have to change what it looks like. The dancers have to change what they look like. And I don't know what they look like. We're finding out. This is one way.
Mhm. Yeah, that section really requires listening. Like we can't just go through the motions of that section. It's like, no, it's a way to tap in, to like see each other, to be in tune with yourself. And I think it's, yeah, just a beautiful way to build that into the choreography.
I think one of the things that in rest that I'm thinking about that also supports it is the music that Jeff Berman, who is making, he's made some composition for dance before, but I think this is the first full length piece, and I think the music is amazing, percussive and electronic and cinematic, and we both wrote 2 songs together, Cry Me, which happened somewhere, that was like that's a testimony to my patient's experience. And briefly I'll say about that, like how do you tell patients' experience, who've been shot or run over or diseased or have fallen, or without it being maudlin or without it being distancing. So I love the song that we came up with for that. And then Cry Me at the end becomes kind of like was that a civil unrest song with a folksy kind of entreaty to heal the world. It's all over the place. But in Rest, we have that beautiful music that kind of falls us into thinking we might be at the spa for a little bit. And I find that very delicious and very, I'm thinking about listening to music when I go see dance. I don't think I've heard this before in this context, and I really like that. It also feels risky.
Mhm. Yeah.
I
I mean,
guess
Jeff's music is
sorry.
incredible. I think Jeff's music is incredible. It's really, I think that'll just be a great. I mean, if you don't like Rest the section, you might like Rest the music because it's such a journey.
One of the songs. But you also worked with Jeff, right? You had Jeff come in and help you. Not
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, Jeff is like an incredible percussionist, and he like a lot of, I think, dancing. So for one of my classes, I invited him to come in and collaborate in real time and played for one of my classes. And yeah, he's great, like to have in the room, such a great listener. And yeah.
and I think it's important again. It's like everybody that's kind of coming through is like kind of committed, right, to doing that. I guess I'm just something that's knocking on the back of my head here to
Mhm.
talk about a little bit, because we did start this piece in 2019 was the first kind of investigation. Then the pandemic, we went to Zoom for a little while, and then it was impossible to keep that up. And then we've been back in the studio, but still trying to pull off, a really deep dive while several of us, if not all of us, are engaged in pretty much full-time work in other capacities too. It's been really challenging. And the Zoom thing was really challenging. And I feel like there are some dances there that they make me feel, I don't know what the word is, but it's very, I feel happy that, like, for example, when we were all working in our postage stamp living rooms, and then there was this expression of like, well, if I like, how can I express like expansion and like space, and from this postage stamp space, or flying, which we call flying, the piece we do on the floor, which when we got bored of like bumping into our walls, we sort of went down onto the floor and was like, wait, there's more space down here. But I think it was a particularly, I think it's important to talk about some of the more difficult challenges. And I think when we went, that have happened in the process, because, it's not cool to let, um, you know, I don't know, making work is hard, right? And when we came to renegotiate or kind of remanifest or bring the section flawed flying, it's variously called, out of the Zoom world and back into the studio and into our bodies. And you had that moment where you were like, I don't even remember doing this. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
I just, but I mean, I think that like, I just kind of want to include in this process that everybody has been through a time and has changed. And I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that, or that was.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you're speaking about, yeah, that translation from shut down, rehearsing on Zoom, and then coming back to the studio or back to the dance space. Yeah, I'm glad that you're giving space to that, because it's important to like pause for a moment and to be like, wait, what is this, and I think certain like motors are like telling us to just like get back in it and get back to it, and like nothing has changed, and like but those aren't the people that I want to be listening to, or that's not like the pace that I want to ascribe to. And so I think that moment in rehearsal was really like lovely for me, because I really did, yeah, it was the moment of doing something in a context and then walking into another context and being like, oh yeah, it's the same. And then I'm like, oh, is it the same? Or like how, like what is that mode of like bringing it from there to here? Like that's a journey, that's a mile, those are miles to travel from doing this work in our own spaces into bringing it to the studio, and then ultimately bringing it to the stage, the Skirball stage. So I think I'm glad that we took time to like honor that, and to like bring that, to honor what we found in our own spaces, and to bring that into this space with us. Because for a moment I was like, oh, these are two separate dances, and like now I'm here and I'm doing this, but it's like, no, I do have a history with this dance that I just need time to connect it to.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is work that takes time and attention. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's mostly like to say that, like, sure, we started in 2019, and some things made it all the way across to the other side, and some things got lost in translation. They really did, or they just became irrelevant, to where we are right now. I think we have made a piece for the times. I think we are going to. I think we are inhabiting a space that is right now,
Mhm.
and I guess we'll see what else. I also feel just in this container, I just want to um, make a nod to Doug LaCour, who also was a dancer that was in this process with us for a long time. And then actually is not in New York right now, so bowed out, but was, is indelible and is still, that shadow, that shadow and light is still in the work too. So thank you, Doug.
Yes, I was thinking when you named like the collaborators, I was like, oh, Doug, but I'm glad that you named him here. This has been a lovely conversation. I'm curious if you had anything else that you wanted to name or speak to in this container.
Well, I feel very grateful to have this opportunity to talk about the world and our movement through it, and with you, Angie Pittman. Thank you.
Yeah, it really feels like an extension of rehearsal and like
Yeah, if
research.
anybody's curious, it's kind of what we move and then we do this mostly. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Keely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.